Hey up me ducks, it's Physics PhD Live here, and today is Saturday the 9th of January 2021, and so this is then going to be the first weekly instalment of my little debrief of what I've been working on in this last week. So, it has been the first proper week back after the whole, Christmas, New Year break period, in which I actually did exercise, having a little bit of a little bit of time off because it's been it's been a hectic and very busy year, as I imagine it has been for many people. So yeah, started off strong. So my departmental laptop, which I've been given, I had an update. I had an Ubuntu update on it, so I went through the update, and in doing so, it managed to misplace my volume groups, which is stressful because then when I boot it up, then I can't find the partition upon which all of my work is stored. And given that the IT services at my university weren't really too helpful in offering possible solutions or helping me to come through it, I decided that the way in which I can resume use of the machine sooner rather than later was to salvage all of the things I could off the disk and basically reinstalling a new operating system from a memory stick. So I'm now running Ubuntu 18.04, I want to say, from some memory stick I had lying around. So that seems to have fixed it, and I'm now off the grid as far as my university goes, which is kind of cool. And the fact that I've managed to keep all of my RSA public and private keys intact as well now means that I have the fortunate ability to still be able to access all of the HPC clusters I use. HPC being high performance computing. So I can still log into the National Facility Archer. I can still use Young, which is the London supercomputer for material science. For some reason, I can't get into the local cluster that my university uses, which is adorably called Gravity, but I'm not too upset about that, as it's a very old cluster, and admittedly, the the machines I have already, are actually faster and easier to work with, because I actually have I have GUI access when it comes to things like code development and everything, whereas on Gravity it's just you have a terminal, and if your code doesn't run, you'd better be happy to debug in Vim, which is fine, but if you have to choose between having an IDE like Visual Studio or Spider or whatever and Vim, you choose the dedicated IDE. That's interactive development environment to those of you who don't code regularly. So there was that. I've also just about finished the second proper working draft of my paper about surface rearrangement of platinum deposited onto gold. So that's a paper I'm working on, which I'm probably going to submit to the American Chemical Society, I think, or maybe to Nano Letters. We've not yet decided who we'll submit this to. I've also put about another 8 or so pages, not including references, into my upgrade reports so that I can actually be a proper PhD student and everything, so I have to go through this whole transfer process, and I've basically just been trying to take everything I've been doing in the last 18 months, stuff it in and say, look how amazing I am, when, the imposter syndrome really does. It gets you, because you think you're writing down, you say, oh, this is amazing, look at all these things I've done, look at these calculations I've done, and then you also reflect and think, actually, I'm not convinced I did a very good job of this, or I'm not sure I'm really faithfully describing what I've been doing. So it's this really bizarre dichotomy that you live with. And I don't suspect it actually gets that much better, that you always have this kind of shadow of a doubt living over you, which is admittedly probably quite healthy on account of the fact that it keeps you humble and it makes sure that you don't let yourself get carried away with what seem like very cool and very fun sounding things. But I don't know, that's I suppose that's for me to try to reconcile and deal with. Excellent. So yeah, it's mostly been a writing week, as I've not had a chance to do too much code development on account of the fact that the laptop which I do most of my development on has had to be rebuilt, and by these definitely not expert hands as well. So I've not been able to develop much on my Sapphire project. Sapphire being the pipeline I've been creating for facilitating molecular dynamic simulations. So the idea is that you can, it's sort of, it comes in sections, and you can either work through all of the sections or you can just use specifically one. So the way that I've designed it is you have the pre-processing, where you can build up the structures that you like to play with. So let's say, for instance, I want to have something called a Janus particle, which is one side, say for instance metal A, and then on the other side is metal B, and they're joined together like the two hemispheres of your brain. Don't know why I pronounced it like that, but yeah. And Janus being named after the Greek god as not Greek, Roman god even, sorry, who had a head looking two ways, and so you can see why that would then come to describe particles, who are this this sort of dimer but brought together. So yeah, so you can create, so the idea is that you can create these kind of systems. You can then introduce what sort of potentials, be they analytical or numeric, that you'll be using for doing molecular dynamic simulations, and then you can also pass through the kind of simulation that you'd like to do, which will then create a series of input files to be run with our in-house software that my supervisor developed way back when, in some really old Fortran 90 code. It's so awesome. Like, it's all commented in a mixture of French and Italian with some English. It's good times. It's definitely good times. And then the main bulk of this Sapphire project is all of the post-processing which I've been developing, as it initially started out as a whole post-processing thing, in that you're just reading some output file, a trajectory or a forces or whatever about about a system that you've done molecular dynamics with, and then you can report a whole slew of descriptors. So things like potential energy changes, calculated surface area, these things called Lindemann indices, which basically tell you by how much your particles are trying to rearrange themselves, which can be used to determine if this thing is melted, for instance. And I'm also introducing loads of the statistical analyses techniques. So one of the ones that I'm really quite liking is this change point detection, which I studied in my second master's degree, in which you have these time-dependent signals, and you can have some sort of prior. You can have some sort of prior on what you think their relationship should be, based on other calculations that you may have done, or based on your understanding of physics, whatever. And then you're looking to see when the distribution which underlies the way in which you calculate, in which these quantities are reported, at which point that distribution changes, which could suggest that you've undergone some sort of phase transition, or something significant has changed in your system. So be it you've melted, or you now have a homogeneous mixture of metal A with metal B, for instance. And so it's a case of reporting all of the signals and how they're changing, and trying to statistically infer when an event has happened independently of making an observation. So there's some cool tools that I'm playing with that. So yeah. That's another paper that I'm actually writing at the moment, is the one which is going to be publishing and releasing Sapphire. Yeah, the reason I make that face is it's a big job. And then the other big thing which has happened this week is the fact that I am going to be moving back to London. As of tomorrow, in fact, I'm driving down, and according to the government's guidelines as well, I am allowed to move house. I've already okayed this with my support bubble. I've discussed this with the new people who I'll be moving in with. Everything's kosher, everything's cool, so don't worry, we're doing things by the book, and we're keeping hands squeaky clean. It's been lovely talking to you guys, and I hope that I'm going to be able to keep this thing going as well, as it would be really good fun to, continue to talk about science and what I've been up to. I have been Physics PhD Live. Ta-ra for now, Shug.